Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Village Voices for May of 2025. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Trudy Peterson, and I'm the Village Voices Coordinator for Capitol Hill Village. Obviously, I don't make this program work by myself. We've got a lot of people to thank. Mary Bloodworth is on. She is our tech support for this, and we couldn't do it without her. I promise you we couldn't. And of course, Judy Berman makes the Capitol Hill Village run for all purposes. Thanks also to Maygene Daniels and Karen Stuck, who do publicity. And without them, you would never know that we actually had an event tonight. So great thanks to all of those people. Now, we are recording this session, and so we're going to ask you to be mute during the talk. If there is during the talk something that you really want to ask, you don't want to interrupt, and you're afraid you'll forget by the time we get to the end of the program, we urge you to use the chat. And Mary and I will both watch the chat while David talks, and I promise you we'll get back to you at the end of his presentation. So please feel free, use the chat. We love to have questions and comments, but we don't want to interrupt our speaker. With that, then, let me introduce tonight's presentation by David Pelizzari. And I think many of us have had the experience of trying to clean out a house, our own or maybe our parents', and we've run across old books and we've wondered what to do with them. And do they have any value? And would it be worth more if it had an inscription? Would it be worth more if it had a cover, a dust jacket on it? Is it a first edition? And if so, does that really mean anything anymore when everything is digital? David Pelizzari has been looking at rare books since he says he saw his grandfather's volume of Dante on a high shelf when he was a small boy and climbed up to take a look at it. Since then, he has been all over. He's been at Yale's Beinecke Library, where he was working on his PhD in Yale. He has worked in Canada, in France, in New York City, here in DC. He's got expertise in, he says, antiquarian French, Italian, and Latin texts, archival ephemera, contemporary and historical LGBTQ plus materials, and the arts. He's a member of the Washington Rare Book Group, the Baltimore area bibliophiles, various French and Canadian bibliographic societies, and he serves on the board of our own Capitol Hill Restoration Society. So welcome, David, and tell us, are the books that we've got stacked up with dust on them really worth anything today?
Thank you so much, Trudy and Mary, and everyone who's come this evening. The answer to Trudy's question is maybe, and the answer is they may have a value today that is completely changed by tomorrow. And I'll talk through some of that. I have been in a lot of homes on Capitol Hill talking about books, helping people decide how to grow their collections or how to disperse their collections. And that has led me to want to sort of talk to the middle of collectors here this evening, the middle of people who own books. I should avoid the word collection for the moment. So, but by talking the middle, it's almost guaranteed that I'm going to displease 50% of the audience who wants to learn more and who thinks I'm talking above them, and 50% of the audience who is at home rolling his or her eyes because I'm talking too naively to them. But that's how I'm going to pitch the talk. I am not a collector. That's the first thing to tell you. I'm not a collector. I am someone who describes himself as having a library. And those two terms, as well as a third term, are going to be part of the conversation this evening. A collection is something that I hope we can eventually come to a definition of as the talk proceeds. A library at the other end of the spectrum is a group of books that I wanted, I read, I read, I will reread. They are reference books. They are part of my professional life. They are part of my mental toolkit that I use all the time. That's what I would call a library. In the middle between a collection and a library is what you see behind my head right now, is just a place in your house where somebody puts all the books they have. And it is neither a collection nor a library. It is neither a purposefully built group of books that have some important similarity among them. That's a collection. Or neither is it a set of books that are read regularly, reread, that were desired for different purposes and that are part of one's mental or professional life. In the middle, a bunch of books on the shelves. Now, in daily life, we all use all those terms interchangeably, and we need to. But for the sake of the talk this evening, I need to separate those concepts, and I hope that makes sense. I'm going to start with like a movie tease. I'm going to talk about 4 particular books, maybe 4.5 if I have time, because I believe that the best way to talk about a collection and the value it might have, about how to collect, about how to disperse, is with concrete examples. And what I'm going to do is quickly flash by you the 4 books that I'm going to focus on. A bad pulp, I'm flashing it on purpose, a bad pulp novel from 1932, a set of World War II post-war interviews, a book club edition of a science fiction novel from France, and a 201-year-old commonplace book in a fancy binding. Now, of all the 4 books I've shown you, this is probably the one that many people think of when they think of book collecting. They think of the opening of Masterpiece Theater and leather-bound books on a set of shelves. But collecting is much more varied than that. It can be any number of things, and I'm going to show you via each volume some feature that constitutes what I would call collectability, some feature that may be within the books you already have, or may be within the books you wish to acquire, that could be the seed of a collection. Now, all of these 4 books that I've just flashed by you, they don't come from a collection because they come from my library. They have nothing to do with each other. And when I was talking about this presentation with a friend beforehand, the first thing the friend said was, you know, those books, they have nothing to do with each other. That makes no sense. But I'm doing it on purpose because I want to show you what is the seed of a collection, what are the features of a book that constitute collectability as a way of building a definition of a collection. In fact, when Trudy first invited me, one of the things I said to her is that an alternate title for this presentation would be Book Collecting, Conventional and Otherwise. Of the items I've shown you so far, probably that last book, the 201-year-old leather-bound volume, is the most conventionally conceived. But the rest are all also interesting. Now I'm going to start with a very bad pulp novel from 1932. You can see the title, I think. The Gay Bandit of the Border. I bought this book just because the title made me laugh. That's all. I'm not collecting books of this sort. The title made me laugh. I thought, I want that book. Now, this is a book from 1932, and you will already have understood that the title has altered its meaning since 1932. It now has connotations of sexuality that were not in play in 1932. In 1932, the gay bandit of the border meant the mischievous bandit, the bandit that had a twinkle in his eye, the bandit who had a mysterious identity. This is a pulp novel written by Tom Gill, who was a writer of Westerns, but also chiefly a forester. He wrote several volumes with great expertise on forestry. And in parallel, he wrote a bunch of Westerns. This is a crappy, kitschy, melodramatic Western. I can tell you that in all honesty because I read it. It is nonetheless interesting, and it is collectible for the reasons I'm going to tell you about. First of all, you can see perhaps down at the bottom, I will tell you about it if the letters aren't clear, that it is a photoplay edition. This novel, The Gay Bandit of the Border, was first published in 1931 in a non-photoplay edition. Hollywood bought the rights to it immediately, and in 1932, this photoplay, a movie tie-in edition, came out. Now, when Hollywood produced the movie, they called the movie The Gay Caballero. This title was used and reused several times in Hollywood movies. This movie came out in 1932. It starred George O'Brien, who was then a matinee idol. It has nothing to do with the later uses of the Gay Caballero title. It was reused first, 8 years later, in a movie called The Gay Caballero that was part of the Cisco Kid series starring Cesar Romero. And those were comedies in a series. This is not a comedy. This is a romantic melodrama about the border country, about the line between Mexico and the United States. As I say, it's kind of a bad novel, but it's a real page turner. There is a cross-border romance. The daughter of the most villainous character in the novel, who is not the gay bandit. That daughter is in love with the best friend of the gay bandit. The gay bandit, by the way, is a good guy. He's kind of a Robin Hood figure who's trying to stop Mexican gangs and other evil landowners from destroying the ranch life of the southern US. Now, a photoplay edition is a book that has stills from a Hollywood movie in it, such as this. And photoplay editions were first issued in 1912. The marriage between Hollywood and West Coast Hollywood and East Coast Publishing started very early. Photoplay editions were first issued in 1912. They sort of reached their peak in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And the most prominent publisher of them, not the only one, but the most prominent publisher of them was Grosset and Dunlap. Now, if you talk to book collectors and book dealers, they will sort of take a sneering tone with Grosset and Dunlap because they were chiefly known as a reprint publishing house. They did publish some genuine first editions, but they're still an interesting publishing house. And I might say that collecting photoplay editions is fun. It's also sociologically interesting, and it is interesting in the history both of Hollywood and of publishing, because, as I say, the marriage between West Coast Hollywood and East Coast publishing happened very quickly. The chief feature I want you to notice about this is that it has its dust jacket, and its dust jacket is in pretty good shape. In fact, it's an especially interesting dust jacket, pretty typical of its day, because you can see in this corner, it has what's called a cropped flap. This is not a flap where the price has been cut off. It was produced as a cropped flap. Also, inside is a list, you don't need to be able to read these, you'll just have to trust me, is a list of all the other titles produced by Grosset and Dunlap available at the time. So this dust jacket in itself has a publishing and sociological story to tell. I also want to point out that the author's name, Nathan Macty, is here as the illustrator. He became famous as an illustrator of dust jackets for movie tie-in volumes from Grosset and Dunlap chiefly, because he was good at redrawing movie stars' faces in this illustrated way. The background is not in the movie. This George O'Brien's face obviously is, and Macty had a skill in creating covers like this. He also did illustrations for publications like Red Book. And so he had an ongoing life as an artist. Now, the reason I'm pointing all these things out is that you may not be interested in Gay Bandit of the Border or any photoplay edition of any movie, but many collectors are. In fact, if you want to read this novel and you go to the Library of Congress to get a copy, you have to go to the rare book room and ask for it there. And the reason is not because this particular novel has any special rarity, but because this particular novel is already part of a gigantic collection. It is already officially part of a collection, the Western Americana collection, that was collected by a famous book dealer and book collector in Minneapolis. His name was Larry Dingman. And when he died, he was considered the dean of American Western fiction. And when he died, a portion of his collection came to the Library of Congress. I use the word portion sort of in italics because the Library of Congress in their Larry Dingman Western Americana collection has 5,371 volumes. So this is a very substantial collection. Toward the end of this talk, I'm going to give you the current value today of each of these volumes. I'm not going to tell you quite yet, just as a tease to make sure you stay through the entire presentation. But the point of this is that a given book may not have any value in itself, but it can become an extraordinary brick in a wall of extraordinary value when it becomes part of a collection. So that's my first example, a photoplay edition with its dust jacket. At the end, I'll talk about the difference in value between this same book with a dust jacket and this same book without a dust jacket. Now I'm going to move from the ridiculous to the sublime with my second example. It is what I flashed by you earlier as a volume of World War II interviews. This is a very important book in the history of awareness of the Holocaust. It is called I Did Not Interview the Dead. It is by David Pablo Broder. In 1946, Broder, who had an extraordinary life himself, and I will tell you a little bit about it in a moment, went to Europe with a wire recorder, which had just been invented by a colleague of his at the Illinois Institute of Technology. And he took this amazing gizmo, a predecessor of magnetic tape, with him to Europe, and he sat down, and in the space of, I believe it was 9 months, 6 months maybe, he interviewed 130 people who had survived the Nazi death camps. Broder himself was born in the Pale of Settlement, what was then part of Russia. He was born in what we now call Latvia. He was educated in Lithuania and Germany, and then went and did his PhD in psychology at St. Petersburg in Russia under the Tsarist regime. he sensed that there was a growing anti-Semitism, he himself being Jewish. He sensed that there was a growing anti-Semitism under the Tsarist regime. And so he took himself and his young daughter, he had been married and quickly divorced. He and his young daughter migrated. They escaped, really, but though this wasn't an escape yet in Hugger Mugger, they sort of did this openly. They moved from Europe to Japan and then to Mexico, where Boder taught in Mexico City, and then eventually the United States. He became a US citizen in 1932. Boder was extraordinarily well placed to do these interviews because he was able to do them in English, French, I've had to write this list down, English, French, German, Latvian, Lithuanian, Polish, Russian, Spanish, and Yiddish. He ended up doing altogether 130 interviews, all recorded on this wire recording machine. He brought them back with him to the Americas and eventually sat down to transcribe them. And he transcribed all of the interviews eventually. 8 of them he translated into English initially. Eventually, he would try to translate all of them. And he published them in this book, I Did Not Interview the Dead. The thing, and here's where I'll probably get choked up, the thing that is so powerful about this book is that the word Holocaust did not yet exist to describe the Holocaust. The word existed, but it existed as a common noun. It existed for since the Middle Ages. It had existed since the Vulgate translation of the Bible, but it meant simply a burnt offering, a burnt sacrifice done on an altar, and it was not inherently negative. It was a ritual term, and the word didn't yet exist when, as a label for what we now call the Holocaust, when Boder did these interviews. And that, to me, is extraordinarily moving. This is a book about one of the most terrible and important episodes in human history in the last 2 centuries, and neither Boder nor the people in it, nor the publishers, nor the public who had the possibility of buying this book yet had any word to describe the specific historical event that had occurred. Within the book, Boder has to refer to these people as displaced persons, DPs, and what is especially moving of all the moving parts is that the people who were interviewed themselves, they didn't have a word for what they had been through. You'll never hear the word Holocaust. In fact, the word Holocaust really didn't become used in the Western world and in English in particular for this historical event until the publication of Elie Wiesel's memoir in 1958 in France, his famous memoir called La Nuit, Night. And it had a preface, a foreword by François Mauriac, the French writer, then had his own Nobel Prize. And he uses the word Holocaust to describe what this young kid had seen, the young Elie Wiesel, but he used it as a common noun without a capital H. It wasn't a historical event yet. He was trying to use it poetically to describe this event. The word Holocaust as a Holocaust, as to refer to the historical event, didn't become commonplace in English until that volume was translated into English. The word reappeared, Francois, in the preface, because Mauriac's preface was translated. And eventually it crept into popular culture. the awareness of the Holocaust really didn't exist in general American consciousness until the movie Judgment at Nuremberg was made in 1961, and above all, until it was broadcast on national television in 1965. Interestingly enough, in the script for the movie, the word Holocaust never occurs. So this, to me, is a remarkable volume because it's trying to describe something before anybody knew how to describe it. It is also remarkable for another reason. This is what we call an association copy. And here's the feature of the book that I want you to remember when you think about your own collecting. You'll see that there's a notation here in ink in two handwritings. One that is more stable, sort of a regular normal Palmer method handwriting, and then a signature. It is the dedication part says, to Rabbi Levi Meyer, with compliments from the author's daughter, Elena Boder. This is the daughter with whom David Boder escaped from, or fled, the Pale of Settlement in order to wander around the world until he ended up in the United States. Now, the two handwritings are interesting. Her shaky signature suggests that she signed it in older age. And that is very plausible, and that she would give it then to her local rabbi, who perhaps wrote out this dedication in advance of her signing it. This is an association copy, and it becomes more valuable and more powerful, really, because of that association. An association copy is a copy that is not signed or inscribed by the author, her or himself, but by someone who is deeply, closely, irrefutably associated with that author. And that's what it is. More interesting still, Elena Boder became a prominent neurologist and is one of the founders of the studies of dyslexia. She is in her field of neurology and dyslexic associated studies. She's basically the Marie Curie. She ended up a professor in California and in fact died in California in 1995. I suspect that this is a volume that came down from her father, was in her own household, and that towards the end of her life, as she was dispersing books, she dedicated it to her friend, Rabbi Levi Meyer, and that's how the association inscription came about. Again, it has a dust jacket. To tell you the truth, it is not a remarkable looking book. It is from the University of Illinois Press in Urbana, a perfectly respectable, wonderful academic press, but not of the first renown. It is, to me, an extraordinarily valuable book and a moving book, not only because of Boder's accomplishment and desire to accomplish such a thing, to interview people before anybody had the words to understand what they'd been through, and because it belonged to his daughter. So that's an association copy. We've had a photoplay edition with a dust jacket, an association copy. These are factors that increase the value of any book that you may be collecting or may be dispersing if you have such books on your shelves. Now I've gone from the ridiculous to the sublime. I'm going to go back to something that you may think is ridiculous. I do not. I think this is a great novel. I don't know if you can see it, but it is a French edition. The title is La Planète des Singes, and you will know immediately that it is the original text of Planet of the Apes. Planet of the Apes was written by Pierre Boulle, a French writer. It was who was famous, most renowned in both France but more in the United States for Bridge over the River Kwai, which was published, I have to think, published, I believe, five years before. Planet of the Apes, La Planète des Singes, was published in France in 1963. It was published in the same year in English in the United States and in the UK. In the UK, it was published under the title Monkey Planet, and in the United States, it was published under the title Planet of the Apes. Let me tell you right away that the movies have very little to do with tone and intent and intellectual prowess with this book. This is an extraordinary novel. And it is French science fiction, but it is science fiction in a mode that is parabolic, is the way I would say it. It never preaches a sermon, but it tells an extraordinary story. And it is quite different in the way it tells the story from the movies that were based on it. The first movie was most famous for having a shocking ending where the Planet of the Apes turns out to be Earth. In fact, there's only one planet, and it's misunderstood what it is. In the novel, there are two real planets. There is a real space voyage that relies on relativity to go to a planet that is orbiting Betelgeuse, the star Betelgeuse, and there is a very spooky, interesting frame around the whole thing by beings that are traveling in space, and they find a bottle with a message in it that tells the story that is recounted by the narrator of the novel, the narrator of the text of the novel. The narrator of the text of the novel is not Charlton Heston. It is a Frenchman named Ulysse Meroux. His name is Ulysses, and he is traveling in the company of a scientist to this planet. They're going there very willfully. They don't know that there are apes there in charge of the world. But it's a novel that it falls into a French science fiction tradition that is quite different from what we now think of in the Anglo-Saxon world as science fiction. There was a tradition of science fiction in France before the label science fiction ever existed that goes back to the 17th century. And the first author of it was Cyrano de Bergerac, the real one, not the guy with the nose in the 19th century play. There was a real Cyrano de Bergerac. He had a real nose, and it's kind of a handsome big nose, but it's not worth a play. In the 1640s, he wrote a manuscript about a voyage to the moon. In the 1650s, he wrote a manuscript about a voyage to the sun. And these voyages have a scientific aspect, such as the science was in the day, but they started a tradition that is it's more sociological, satirical, and analytical than it is about the sheer mechanics of rocket ships. Cyrano de Bergerac in the 17th century, a few years later, Voltaire wrote a science fiction tale called Micro Megas, and this led to the eventual tradition that led to Jules Verne and all of his works. Now, what's very interesting about Jules Verne and Planet of the Apes is that if you ask the average American, what nation did 20,000 Leagues of the Sea Under the Sea come from, or what nation did Planet of the Apes come from, they'll say the US. These are American books. No. There has been a cross-fertilization between French and American culture that has been ongoing for centuries, and the cross-fertilization is so complete that neither the French nor the Americans understand are fully conscious of the degree to which the two cultures influenced each other. Now, this is a book club edition, and it is also a first edition in the world, in France, of Planète des Singes. It is also one of two first editions. And the reason I want to emphasize that is that there are first editions and first editions, and the current American notion of a first edition being the first printing of what an American publisher calls a first edition doesn't always apply. There are genuinely two first editions of Planète des Singes. The volume, both this book club edition and the standard edition, the normal French edition, which is broché, which means that it has paper covers. You've probably seen these European first editions. They're very well produced, but they do have paper covers, not hard covers. And they were published within 2 days of each other. They were both published by the same publishing house, Julliard. And this was actually printed 2 days before the Rocher, the paper-covered one, which was the official first trade edition. This was not released until 2 days after that paper edition. Both of them are officially considered the first edition. I also mentioned that this is a book club edition. France was watching American publishing, and over the years after the initial success of the Book of the Month Club, there were many French publishers who wanted to imitate the model. But they didn't imitate it exactly. American book clubs were about convenience and economy. You could get the same book cheaper, and you could get it mailed to you from a book club. French book clubs were quite different. They were about prestige, and they were not cheaper, worse, crappier editions, which is how most big book dealers see American book club editions. They were slightly fancier editions. In fact, they were in a category the French know as demi-luxe, semi-deluxe, and this is one of them. It is a numbered edition. We don't know. This is the limitation page at the end. This is number 336. Out of a certain limited edition, I suspect that that limited edition was about 1,000 copies. And the reason is I've seen many copies of this, and none of them exceed in their number 900. The founder of this book club, his name was Maurice Dumoncel. He was a publisher in his own right of Talendier. And he started a book club called Le Cercle du Nouveau Livre. That's what this is. The circle of the new book circle. And they would deliberately seek out interesting manuscripts and publish them ahead of when they became available to the general public. And that's why we can say quite validly, and very serious Parisian booksellers will tell you quite validly, there are two first editions of Planet of the Apes. They both come from the same publisher. They were published within 2 days of each other. One is the book club, the Cercle du Nouveau Livre edition in this demi-luxe format. The other is the standard paper-covered Rocher copy. Now, I'm not going to do this because I'm talking too much, but the same year, the American edition of Planet of the Apes was published. It was translated by Zan Fielding. Pierre Boulle, the author, himself worked as a spy during the Second World War, as a spy for the Free French government. And his translator, Zan Fielding, a Franco-Brit, a Brito-Franc, also worked as a spy. And I actually think one way of collecting interesting books would be to put books by spies, translated by spies, next to cookbooks by spies. And I think you probably know what I'm talking about, because Julia Child was a spy during the Second World War. She was a member of the OSS. Now, so we've seen a book from 1931, a David Boder's book from 1949, Planet of the Apes from 1963. Now we're going to jump back to 1824. This is what many of us might consider a fancy book. It shows it's 201 years of age, edges are chafed, and so on. But I want to point out some features. It is bound in what's called Morocco. That's goat leather. It was given a euphemistic name because originally the leathers came from Morocco. In russet-colored Morocco, it has borders that are called dentelle, which is simply the French word for lace. The text block, and I hope you can see this, is entirely gilt. All edges, all the way around, are gilt. And in fact, this may be hard to see, even the edges of the boards have gilt fillets. These are thin lines that decorate the edges of the boards. Inside, the end papers are genuine marbling paper. Now, you will find many books that simply, as it were, take a photograph of marbling and use that as marble papers. These are real marbled papers. This is a fascinating book, and it is particularly precious to me for reasons I'm about to tell you. This book exemplifies an inscribed copy, a presentation copy, a private press copy, an association copy, and yet the author didn't sign it. So I'm going to tell you a story that has a scandal in it. The author, and there are three characters in the story. You don't need to remember their names. There's an author, there's a collector, and there's a protege. The author of this book is William Lord Grenville, the first Baron Grenville. He was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in 1805 and 1806, and his greatest accomplishment, and a very important one, is that he passed the abolition of slavery laws in the UK. So this is a book that reflects that remarkable heritage, but it is not, it is also what we would call, or what was called then, a commonplace book. It is not really a bunch of prose or poetry, or not a bunch of prose written by this author. What it is a set of beautiful selections of his favorite poems in various languages, and he would translate them into other languages. And he has a couple original poems in there, and he put them together in a private press volume. We now believe he printed about 50 copies of this, and he would give these as gifts. He was very famous, and he gave these to famous people. He was very powerful and high in society, and he gave these volumes to people who were powerful and high in society. The way that if I had an apple tree in the backyard and canned apple jam every year, I might give apple jam to someone. He was so well known and expected the recipients of his gifts to appreciate his fame so much, he didn't even put his name in the book. The book is, as it were, published anonymously in a private press. And he made these beautiful copies, and he would pass them out. Now, here's where the story thickens, because I'm going to show you an inscription in the book. And it says, Mr. Heber, from the author. The author being, I told you there's an author, a collector, and a protege. The author being Lord Grenville, the former Prime Minister of the UK. The collector is Mr. Heber, Mr. Richard Heber. Richard Heber is renowned as the greatest collector of books in the English language. And there are some who will say he was the greatest collector, private collector of books in the world. I think maybe he has some competition from certain Chinese emperors, but certainly in the West, he was the greatest collector. His collection is estimated to have been between 150,000 and 300,000 books. He had them in several homes in the UK and on the continent. After he died in 1833, his collection was auctioned off over the course of 4 years. It took 17 auctions to disperse the collection. That number is frequently reported as 16. I'm going to call it 17 because in the middle, there was a separate auction for illustrated books, maps, and charts. And often that's kind of included in the 16. But in fact, there were 17 separate auctions, 14 of them in London, 2 in Paris, and 1 in Ghent. And so great and so important for the book collecting world were these auctions that properly typeset and hardbound catalogs were produced for each auction. There were 16 such catalogs. If this evening you have $13,500 burning in your pocket, you can turn me off right now and go online and you can buy the complete set of those original 16 catalogs from a dealer in New York City. I verified that they're still available this morning. So this is the vastness of this collection and the importance of this collection. Now, I said that there's an author, a collector, and a protege. Mr. Heber was a confirmed bachelor, and I'm using that phrase to remind people about how all of us, the world in general, used to refer to gay men. He was a confirmed bachelor. He was nonetheless famous, one of the richest men in England, had tremendous friends in power everywhere. He was a very close friend of Walter Scott's. He was a member of parliament for Oxford, for the university. At one point, he was elected in, I think it was 1821, he was elected Sheriff of Shropshire, which seems to me an extraordinarily Tolkien-like title. And he was super famous in the bibliographical world. Now, there was a young upstart named Charles Hartshorne. This is the protege, who was very ambitious, wanted to become an equally famous bibliographer. And he was kind of pushy, and he pushed his way into Richard Heber's acquaintance. He was a very attractive young man. And Heber, to put it most simply, just kind of fell in love with him. We have no idea what kind of carnal relationship they had, probably none, but it was well known that Heber was in love with Charles Hartshorne. Hartshorne, it seems to me impossible that he didn't know about it. He just knew that he was the apple of Heber's eyes, and Hartshorne climbed that ladder as best he could. Suddenly, Heber disappeared. He suddenly disappeared to the continent in 1825. And even though he was a member of parliament and he was famous and he was rich and he had all these glorious friends, suddenly he disappeared. It turns out that he was being threatened with a lawsuit because he had, it seems, come on to 2 young men at a book club meeting, and or a book circle meeting, I guess I should say. And the father of one of the young men was threatening a lawsuit. Heber was warned, he went to the continent. Now, all of you, I'm sure, can already hear what is not so much an echo as a prophecy of the story of Oscar Wilde. And Heber then lived on the continent from 1826 to, I think, 1831, in a kind of wandering shame, the same way that Oscar Wilde did. Meanwhile, back in the UK, Hartshorne was so worried that this revelation, the rumors that were flying would destroy his career, that he engaged in a lawsuit against against a newspaper that had published very juicy insinuations about the relationship. He won the lawsuit, so he was exonerated. And Heber came back to the UK in 1831, but he was cut dead by all his friends and powerful acquaintances, and he lived in isolation until his death in 1833, though he would be seen in auction houses and so on, still buying books, the books that would keep augmenting his collection up through the moment it was dispersed. This is, to me, a very moving story of, and though at the time it was treated as a scandal, to me, it's a moving story of desire and friendship and betrayal. Walter Scott turned on him like that and described him as engaged in degrading bestiality. This is Walter Scott, who had worked with Heber on Scott's own minstrelsy of the Scottish border. So all of that is embodied in this book. All of that makes it collectible. And this book is actually listed. This very book that somehow ended up in my hands is listed in a famous British bibliography called the Lowndes Bibliography, and it is listed in those catalogs I mentioned. This book went for sale on March 31st, 1835, in the midst of the Heber auctions. Knowing that about a very specific volume, its provenance, the same way one talks about provenance of art, increases the value of a book tremendously. If you have an older volume or any volume that you can describe as having an association, being a presentation copy, and knowing its provenance, you have increased its value. Now, I'll rapidly run through what these books are worth. The Gay Bandit of the Border. I bought it at a book fair in Philadelphia. The dealer had $75 written on it. And as soon as I looked at it, he said, "I'll give it to you for 50." So I took, and that is a good example of how prices melt around these volumes. If you have a copy of it without the dust jacket, $6, $8. That's the difference in price that a dust jacket affords. The Boder volume of Holocaust interviews, I bought, it must have been about 2010 for $300. There are no copies for sale today, period. There are 350 copies in various research libraries, but no copies for sale. I have a hunch that if it went on the market, finding the right buyer, you could get between $300 and $1,000 for it. The Planet of the Apes, that particular volume you can find for between $350 and $1,200 today. That volume, so great are the price variations. Again, it's a question of, do you have a buyer who wants it, who is willing to pay it? Can you describe it in an interesting way? And it is in most libraries. The Library of Congress does not have a copy of this. I am, as far as I know, the only person on Capitol Hill who has a copy of this. It was sold in the Heber auction for £3, but £3 in 1824 is about $450, $500 in 2025. There are 2 copies of this available for sale right now, today. One of them in London for about $850, another one here in the Midwest for $1,650. And that again gives you an idea of the range. Now, I know I've talked too much, but I want to go back to the notion of collection. So a collection is something that is built with a principle based on the features I have named. It could be the author, it could be the binding, it could be the nature of the edition, it could be the provenance, but there's a principle. And by building a collection, you increase the value of a given volume. Any given volume, no matter how sort of intellectually worthless in itself, like this, becomes much more valuable by being part of a collection. And I think with that, I've talked too much, but I will take questions. Trudy and Mary, if there are any questions that have come in, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
We don't have anything in the chat right now, David, so let me start it off by asking, have you ever had a really great discovery? We always think that we're going to go to a book sale and we're going to just find something and we're going to take it home and it's going to be worth a fortune.
You know, I wasn't the one who discovered it, but I've described that Boder volume as a discovery. Trudy, when I bought it, the reason I bought it is that I knew about it. I could not find a copy anywhere to read. I just wanted to read it. I did not buy it for the association for the fact that Boder's famous daughter had signed it. So that, when it came into my hands, was a discovery. And that's kind of a thrilling moment for anybody who's buying books for their library, for their collection, or for just that cluster of books one has in the middle.
So we've talked mostly about buying books, but a lot of us have a lot of books around us, and we've got to think about selling books. What's your advice?
The first thing to do is sort your books. There are books that have meaning that you want to give to family members. Sort them out first. The second thing is, if you have books that have any kind of you suspect they have value, get them appraised. Get them appraised because you will want to know what a fair value is. You will want to be able to, if you donate them, you'll want tax records. You will, if you are giving them to your kids, you'll want to be able to say to your kids, oh no, I shared these things out evenly. Get them appraised. Then you have to just be honest about what you can part with. And there are things you should probably donate. There are things that should go into the little free boxes on the there. There really are. And you should be willing to do that. But those are the first steps: internal triage, appraisal, and then finding a likely target.
We've got a couple questions that I really don't want to take. One is recommending an appraiser and recommending a bookbinder. I think you want to talk to David offline on those kinds of things.
I can help you, but not here.
Yeah. And the appraisal question is, there is a whole international and national association of appraisers, and you get quality people by using those rather than just coming and saying to me, Trudy, what do you think this is worth? But the real interesting question is, to the extent that an autograph is valuable, how does an autograph book plate compare with an autograph in a book?
There are dealers who will sell you autographed book plates as though the book was signed. They simply aren't as valuable. That's all there is to it. It is more fun to have a book plate autographed by Stephen King than to not have one. But book plates are transferable. And there are actually now authors who dislike going to book signings so much that they'll sign a stack of book plates, and then no, I'm not kidding. And then at the what is sometimes called a book signing, there will simply be a dealer who is inserting these book plates into books. They are enjoy them if you have them, and it's perfectly respectable to want them, but they are simply not nearly as valuable as something inscribed in the book.
Okay. David, would you provide your contact information? David Pelizzari at Gmail?
At yahoo.com. You're
Yahoo.com.
talking to a Luddite here. David Pelizzari, all one word, no punctuation, at yahoo.com.
Well, it's been wonderful having you. It's been just tremendous fun. I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed all the stories. I love the background to all these sorts of things. Let me tell you just a minute that about next month, our last of the spring lecture is on Monday, June 9, and it will be April Linton. And she is the president of Duck Watch in the city. She's going to talk about our feathered friends. And if you read the Post yesterday, the Metro section, there was an article about ducks and ducks being saved. It quotes April Linton. So you have now just read her and saw her saving ducks in our city this month. And so join us on June 9 and listen to a duckling story. And we should have lots and lots of fun. Thank you, David. It was just wonderful. And join us again next month.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
Thank
so
Thank you,
much.
David.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.